So, guys, today is a true B-roll because this is a boys-only B-roll. For the boys.
The boys.
The B is for boys? Oh, God. Okay, I
The
already
boys are
regret.
back.
I already regret this. This is terrible. Why did they let us do this? We need Quinton to be babysitting us at all times.
Quinton will be here soon. But yeah, let's talk sports ball. Let's talk beer. Let's talk
Sports ball.
Let's start with bees.
Okay, well, I'll talk about beer. I just want to say I've been drinking a lot of Irish red ales lately, which is a criminally underrated beer style. So I'm just going to plug that in. But the thing I wanted to talk to you all about for the B-roll was a sports ball thing, which anyone who knows me will appreciate is very much not a thing I talk about. But it is the boys B-roll, I guess, so I might as well dig deep. So there's this controversy around Lionel Messi, the Argentinian soccer/football footy, Le Foot superstar. Apparently, he was in an interview and he said that he thinks that his soccer talents, which are obviously quite substantial, are a gift from God. And I think, and I think a lot of people have been kind of making fun of him about that, you know, saying how conceited he is and how arrogant he is. But I just want to stick up for Messi. I mean, if I assume he's religious. I mean, I think Argentina is a pretty religious Catholic country. And so let's say he believes in God. He's clearly one of the greatest soccer players of all time. I don't think that's up for debate. Even a very humble person would, I think, recognize that about themselves. And if you're that kind of person, I think it's actually very nice to say, like, this is not my thing. This is from God. And it's meant to serve humanity because I bring joy to like literally billions of people every 4 years when they watch what I can do on the pitch. I think that's the correct word, on the pitch. So I don't know. I'm standing up for Lionel Messi. He doesn't need standing up for, but I'm standing up for him.
He doesn't need standing up for. He has a whole shrine, if we're going to continue this analogy, a whole shrine
to himself side. In his mansion, in his many mansions. He has many shrines.
It is at least a 10-story mural just of Messi's face in Miami. It is amazing.
In soccer balls. So it's different colored soccer. It's like a pointillist soccer ball mural picture of Lionel Messi's face. You have to stand
it is beautiful.
100 feet back to see it.
I haven't seen people praying to it yet, but I think it might happen soon. But to your point, Alan, I think this is something that is being inappropriately covered because there is something that should be socially acceptable and perhaps even praised when folks express their religious views and not made fun of for channeling that toward whatever their vocation may be, including being really damn good at kicking a ball into a net.
I mean, I just think that it's clear that, you know, for example, Scott has a gift from God for hosting a second-rate national security podcast, and I think that's fine, and we should talk about that.
I think the real question is, what are the terms of this gift? Like, is it a divine rights sort of thing where it means that you are entitled to the proceeds of it? Then
it's a mandate from heaven.
Yeah, then it becomes kind of like you can't tax me. You don't want to tax God, do you? That's where it begins to stretch a little bit. You know, what exactly was the gift and who was it for? But on principle, I would agree. You know, if you're saying like, you know, I'm incredibly blessed to have something, blessed and God-given and all these other students for the same thing, I don't know. I don't have a huge problem with that, admittedly.
I think if you're gonna be religious, you gotta own it, right? And he's owning it. He's saying this is my faith and this is where it's sending me, and it's sending the ball into the back of the net, and that's great. That's glorious.
Ladies and gentlemen, the tax-free church of Lionel Messi.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Rational Security. I am one of your regular co-hosts, Scott R. Anderson, thrilled to be back in the IRL studio with one of my other regular co-hosts, Quinta Jurasek.
Hello.
And we are rejoined once again by our third regular co-host, Alan Rosenstein. Hello, Alan.
Increasingly irregular, but happy to be back.
Irregular,
hello.
more regular.
Semi-regular.
Not as regular as some. That's Alan Rosenstein.
That's true.
And we are thrilled to be joined once again by Kevin Frazier, Law Affairs Tarbell Fellow. Kevin, thank you for coming back on the podcast.
Always a pleasure. I'll try to be more regular if one of us can't be more regular.
Yeah.
And Murals, if you're listening, sponsor Rational Security.
Murals.
Kevin, can I start calling you our Tarball Fellow because you do tech stuff and Linux nerds will appreciate the reference?
You know, as long as we follow up with me saying what its actual name is.
Funders do tend to like it when their names are correct.
That's true. That's true. There's something about
fair
that.
Point.
That's a great way to not get grants renewed.
Yeah, but it was a really funny Unix joke.
Well, funded or no, we're thrilled to have you with us, Kevin, to talk over some of the week's big national security news and what we're calling the God-given edition in honor of Lionel Messi's worldviews, which have informed how we think about our own podcasting. Because we have a couple of big stories in national security news, a few of which are up your alleys, and we're thrilled to have you here to talk them over with us. Topic one for this week, with a segment title courtesy of ChatGPT, who beat the title that I was planning, admittedly, on the first at bat. It's a little embarrassing. I think I might get replaced. Topic one, WikiLeaks. More than a decade in effective confinement. First at the Ecuadorian embassy in London, then in a British prison, WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange is set to plead guilty in a U.S. federal court in Saipan to a single violation of the Espionage Act for his role in securing and publishing troves of classified U.S. diplomatic cables in 2010. At which point he will walk free into his native Australia. What can we learn from Assange's saga? Topic 2, Houthi can't fail. After months of sustained hostilities and a U.S.-led multilateral military response, the Yemen-based Houthis' campaign against shipping through the Red Sea has once again ratcheted up, disabling a number of ships in sometimes fatal attacks and teaming up with similarly Iran-affiliated Iraqi militia groups. As global supply lines strain, is it clear that the international community's strategy has failed? What more or different could it do? And topic 3, I. Am I doing this right?
I have no idea.
You tell us.
I. Apple is set to enter the artificial intelligence game with its new Apple Intelligence, which it will be rolling out on Apple devices in the fall, but not in Europe, in part due to its regulatory posture. What does this tell us about the pros and cons of regulation in this space and how the AI industry is likely to react? For our first topic, Alan, let me hand it over to you to get us started.
All right, so let's talk about Julian Assange. I'm going to do a little backstory summary just so people can remind themselves of the Assange Saga, which is coming up on 2 decades now. Assange is best known for founding WikiLeaks in 2006, which is a platform designed to publish classified and sensitive documents while protecting the anonymity of sources. Under his leadership, WikiLeaks released a bunch of high-profile leaks, including the Iraq and Afghanistan war logs, U.S. diplomatic cables, these are the Chelsea Manning leaks, and perhaps most infamously, and for what I think he lost whatever support he had maybe had previously, a bunch of DNC emails during the 2016 U.S. presidential election, which a lot of people, maybe correctly, maybe incorrectly, think played some non-trivial role in Hillary Clinton's defeat to Donald Trump in that election. So Assange has faced a lot of legal challenges, including allegations of sexual misconduct in Sweden, which he has denied, and charges of espionage and hacking by the U.S. government. So to avoid extradition to Sweden and then potentially to the U.S., Assange sought asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy in London in 2012, where he remained until 2019. It's not entirely unclear why the Ecuadorians kicked him out. They appear to have just gotten sick of him. He was not a great house guest. Apparently there's something about a cat, but folks can chime in and provide more information about that. But the Ecuadorians kick him out in 2019, and then he is promptly arrested by British police. And then until recently, he has been in British custody in jail, fighting extradition to the U.S. And this was the saga for kind of interminably years and years and years. But on Monday of this week, Assange appeared in a federal court in Saipan. This is the capital of the Northern Mariana Islands, for those who are following along with their globe in front of them, to plead guilty to a single felony charge of illegally obtaining and disclosing national security materials. So he's expected to plead guilty, to be sentenced basically to time served of his time in the UK, and then return to Australia. And there will end a sort of multi-decade, I don't even know what to call it exactly. So the first question I'm going to ask you, Quinta, because you've thought a lot about this over the years, and you've written actually quite a bit about Assange. Is this a good outcome? Like, is this justice for the U.S.? Is this justice for Assange? How do you feel that this is how this ended?
Oh, Lord, I don't know. I was surprised by this, certainly. I did not see this coming because Assange has been fighting his extradition to the U.S. for quite a while now. And anyone here should correct me if I'm wrong. My impression was that his odds seem to be like not terrible in UK courts, in large part because of the conditions that he would face in US prisons. The US had given assurances that he would not face solitary confinement or the death penalty, but Assange was reportedly skeptical. And at the very least, the UK courts seemed to be taking some of those concerns seriously to the extent that it, had really already strung out the extradition process by quite a ways. In my view, I think the interesting thing about this plea agreement is the specifics of what exactly is included in this criminal information that Assange pleaded to. The debate over Assange was always, is there a way for the US to prosecute Assange without also criminalizing an enormous amount of legitimate news gathering by reporters? And Jack Goldsmith has written a lot on this on Lawfare. I'd definitely recommend that anyone who's interested take a look at his work. When Assange was first indicted, or when the indictment against him was first unsealed in April 2019, I think there was a bit of surprise that the charge against him was not under the Espionage Act, but was rather a conspiracy to commit computer intrusion. So basically, the allegations were that the good old CFAA,
the good old CFAA, man.
It always comes through for you.
It's always there.
Exactly.
Essentially alleging that he had conspired with Chelsea Manning when she was in the military and giving him these documents for her to hand over these documents to him, but also crucially that he actually helped her crack passwords to get into these systems, so that it was, not straightforward press information gathering situation, but that Assange was actually helping Manning carry out this unauthorized access to the government systems. And I will say at the time, there was a lot of conversation among reporters and freedom of the press advocates about, can we distinguish this from normal press work? And I will say that there was a significant contingent of reporters, including notably reporters who had looked very closely at the Assange saga. Joseph Cox, who was then at Vice and who now is at 404 Media, I think is the first one who comes to mind, who were saying like, no, this is not what journalists do, right? Like, journalists do not conspire with a source on how to hack into systems to get information that they did not otherwise have. That is,
they might in the UK, but they don't in the US. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I'm just making a Washington Post joke here.
Thanks to Will Lewis. We would love your thoughts here, Will. But that is not within the normal realm of journalistic practice in the United States, such that any given reporter should be worried. Now, I will say there was then a superseding indictment of Assange released the next month in May 2019 that did include a lot of charges under the Espionage Act that seemed much more to be in the category of sort of traditional journalistic, publication, and that was potentially concerning. So then if you look at this criminal information, I'm actually not totally clear on to what extent the hacking aspect is included in here. So the charge in question that he's pleaded to is conspiracy to obtain and disclose national defense information. So it is not conspiracy to violate the CFAA. On the other hand, the information about the information that's included in this information describes, a scheme with Manning to access and then publish this material. So maybe the CFAA aspect is kind of included within that. I can kind of argue it either way in terms of whether or not this should be concerning to press freedom advocates. I'm actually really not sure how to read it and would be curious for your all's thoughts. I will say though, look, from a press freedom point of view, we didn't make any law here, right? The guy pleaded out, there's nothing on the books that will, help the government if it chooses to prosecute a journalist in the future. And the other thing that I will say is I think that Assange has pretty decisively burnt basically every bridge that he had ever built here, including with the Ecuadorians, including with the...
He seems like a uniquely unpleasant person, which again is in his defense, I can't believe I'm saying this, but in his defense, to be the sort of person that forms something like WikiLeaks, you kind of have to be a little unhinged in an unpleasant way, but it is the fatal flaw is all I'm trying to say.
That is
right?
True.
It is the double-edged sword.
The sexual assault allegations we could have done without.
That's true.
But yeah, he's just
some of the cat stuff got a little.
Okay, what is the cat stuff?
The cat got out of the bag, and he couldn't even land an ollie, from what I've understood.
That's
the skateboarding
exactly right.
in Ecuador, Tony Hawk wasn't helping him out.
I do want to be serious here about the sexual assault allegations, though, because I do think that they are worth taking seriously. So without getting into the specifics, because I don't have them in front of me, he was accused of sexual assault in Sweden. He routinely sort of frustrated that investigation and hid from it. And if you watch. There are two movies about him that I would recommend. One, Alex Gibney's We Steal Secrets, and the other, Laura Poitras's Risk, which I think was released in 2017. That Risk very prominently features the allegations against him as part of the story. And some of them are very, very ugly. And he also gives repeated comments about how, this is all just like a feminist conspiracy of, hags who are out to get him. At one point, he made a comment that, Trump's election was because of the incels who rose up to attack Hillary Clinton and how great that was. There's a real undercurrent of vile misogyny that was seems to have been animating.
Well, he was on the side of, he was like, it was the incels and that's awesome.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yikes. I didn't know that. That's not great.
He's a uniquely gross individual. And
we haven't even touched on the 2016 GRU operation.
Yeah. Well, before that though, I also think it's worth thinking about the underlying conduct here, the 2010 cable leaks kind of controversy, because I actually think this plays into that as well. And it's part of the reason why I think this is maybe not a very satisfactory conclusion to that investigation, is that was a case where, unlike certain other cases, like the Edward Snowden case, right, where you had another high-profile, highly damaging, according to national security officials, leak. But that particular case, the Snowden case, like many other leak cases, were channeled through conventional newspapers that took steps to limit collateral damage that was not newsworthy to third parties. WikiLeaks did not do that for the cable leaks cases. They haven't done that for a lot of other cases. So a lot of third parties were really, really directly, and in some cases, pretty devastatingly impacted by the cable leaks in 2010. And it tended to be people who were human rights advocates or dissidents or people who were talking to the U.S. government, perhaps in ways that the governments of the states they lived in did not know, did not appreciate in all cases. And there was no effort at all to install any measures to safeguard those third parties. Instead, it was just kind of thrown up on the internet. That's even if you set aside the fact that this was all secured by manipulating someone who's going through, I think, it looks to me like it might have been a mental health crisis in the case of Chelsea Manning, dealing with severe depression and lots of other issues that was being very actively cultivated and manipulated by Assange and people around him to produce more and more information. And then with that level of technical facilitation that Quinta mentioned, that was the underlying of the criminal charges. And I think that's a problem here. This comes off looking like a pretty light slap on the wrist. I don't know if that's true necessarily. I mean, the man has spent the last 10 plus years in effectively confinement, it's pretty brutal conditions. And maybe that's okay to say, all right, this guy's suffered enough. We're not going to fight for this anymore. But it bothers me a little bit from a policy perspective of the Justice Department that we're not seeing any differentiation tied to this in terms of how they approach pleas or settlements by virtue of the fact that this was a reckless act. Even if you are a pro-transparency person who likes some of this information getting out there, this was done in a manner that was reckless and knowingly put other third parties at risk unnecessarily for whatever the public benefit was. And you contrast that again with the Snowden case, where we don't see any discussion of these sort of plea agreements, but at least those basic precautions were undertaken. And I think as a policy perspective, given that leaks are an inevitability, you cannot avoid them. And frankly, I think they are a public good. I don't think it's as one-sided as some people might maintain. Setting up a schema or a policy from the Justice Department or whoever else in the government that says we are going to punish people who do it particularly recklessly, particularly strictly, and save our grace and forgiveness for people who do it in a less reckless manner, I think would be a better policy. But that doesn't appear to have entered in here. Instead, it looks like perhaps very understandable, primarily foreign policy-related reasons, pressure from Australia, probably pressure from the Brits too. The Biden administration decided it was time to wash our hands of this. And I'm not sure that's the wrong choice. I just think it's not an optimal policy that appears to have come out of this.
Scott, I'm curious. I'm kind of curious to your view of kind of the interagency dynamics of all of this, right? I was at DOJ and you were at the State Department, and I can imagine the intelligence community is extremely pissed at DOJ right now, and I wonder if you agree with that assessment, or do you think the IC has also forgotten about this and doesn't want to deal with this anymore? And they're not very forgiving. It's not a forgiving group of professionals.
I think that's right. It's not, frankly, I think the intelligence community probably is pissed, but it's even less the intelligence community than the diplomatic community. Remember, these were mostly secret or below level cables. Like Manning didn't have access to the higher top secret stuff, which tends to be where sources of methods derived information lies. So this was mostly diplomatic cables. These were cables, along with some military, as I recall, kind of cables put in, particularly in Iraq. But most of it was about correspondence by diplomats that gets put out and codified on the secret system to protect it, because there is an expectation. Usually the main reason a lot of stuff gets classified is because it is given with an expectation of confidentiality by the foreign party, and that foreign government information is usually a basis for classifying this sort of stuff. And so, the people who really were most hurt by this were the people managing the United States international relationship. If you have a categorically damning view of the U.S. government saying that no good can come from it, then you might be okay with this. And it's really clear, frankly, that's what Julian Assange's view of the United States is, and a lot of other people in WikiLeaks, right? He's got an almost paranoid view of what they want to do to him and what they do in other circumstances that really facilitate these sorts of actions. But if you have a slightly less binary take on what the United States is good and bad, then you'd recognize doing something like that again is really harmful to third parties and harmful to, frankly, some of the more beneficial things the United States does do in the world, like empowering at different times dissident groups or human rights related organizations in small ways. And unfortunately, that's really what this particular case targeted. WikiLeaks did lots of other things, some of which might be better, some of which might be worse. But the actual conduct at issue in these criminal charges really was just that, a broadside against the U.S. diplomatic capability and anybody who dares talk to the United States. And that's not great from my perspective.
Just to jump in on Quinta's piece from 2019, which I think stands up very well, is this broader meta-narrative of the transformation of the internet itself in terms of the promise and perils of the internet, in terms of releasing information, facilitating transparency, and leading to better outcomes, supposedly, or having some sort of good normative goal, whereas Assange really seemed focused on transparency for the sake of transparency. Even to your point, Scott, I believe Assange said, if Afghan civilians were harmed by the release of information, well, that was on them, more or less. And so getting to this just
seems like a nice
point
guy.
of view. Seems like a nice guy, really stand up. And so I think a problem is he may be the wrong sort of martyr to choose in this fight. And it's unfortunate that we're kind of forced into these camps of, is this the right outcome or the wrong outcome? It's just not, it's one of those classic bad facts make bad law. And here, these are unfortunate facts to have to grapple with, given the extremes of Assange 1.0, let's say, and Assange 2.0, which may be regarded as different folks.
I think that's right. And I think you see that in some ways in the fact that, President Obama commuted Chelsea Manning's sentence before he left office, which I was also reminded in looking at that essay that you mentioned, Kevin, that when that happened, Assange suggested that Obama had done that to make life hard for him, meaning Assange, which is really just like the level of self-involvement that you have to make that statement is genuinely incredible. But there is an extent to which I think Manning is really the more sympathetic character here. I will say in the Gibney film, at least, she comes off as someone who's really kind of lost and needs support in a way that Assange has no interest in providing, really. And so in a strange way, like the more sympathetic part of the story, like it feels a bit like the book has kind of been closed on that with Manning's commutation. And so we're left only with kind of the grossest parts, so to speak. But, if I put on my press freedom advocate hat, I can say, well, that's the problem, right? Like the people who are going to be the test cases are always going to be the people who are unpleasant because, they're the people who do the weird things. And now it's Julian Assange. And next it's going to be, Joe Schmo who did nothing wrong. So I think I don't want to be too sanguine about this, although I will say I think this is a kind of a mid outcome from the press freedom posture. Like it's not necessarily the outcome that I would have wanted, but it's not a terrible outcome either.
I actually have a legal theory as to why it ended up under this charge. May I share with you? This is totally speculation, but maybe slightly informed speculation from having spent some time looking at the two statutes. Because we know the Obama administration, which presumably the Biden administration probably lines up with in terms of views on this, avoided indicting Assange. He wasn't indicted until under the Trump administration, precisely because they were worried about this press freedom and constitutional implications. And they were not shy about using the Espionage Act in lots of other contexts, but they didn't quite get here. I find that Computer Fraud and Abuse Act distinction about having directly involved actually pretty persuasive, but that's not the clause that ultimately he's pled out under. It's under the Espionage Act. I think it might be because under the CFAA, as I read it, the sentencing guidelines vary and spike up dramatically if it's as a result an individual were harmed or killed as a result of the underlying criminal action, up to life in prison in one case, and up to over 20 years in another case. And of course, that's what the U.S. government has alleged has happened in this case already. So my operating theory is that if you had pled out to a CFAA charge, then they would have had dealt with a lot of wrestled with a lot of difficult issues about what actually the consequence of those actions were. That would have put it in a really high sentencing zone. That's much harder to reconcile with the outcome that the parties appear to have agreed to, which is that he walks free at the end of this on time served. The Espionage Act, much more flexible. A lot of Espionage Act convictions and pleas end up with sentences of less than 5 years in the last few years. And so it's a lot easier and consistent with practice to get that outcome. And, worth bearing in mind, the actual sentence of this plea as it comes out, the U.S. government doesn't determine that. The judge determines that. The U.S. government gives a recommendation. Usually it's followed. It'd be really strange if it wasn't. And Assange might have the opportunity to back out of the deal if it's rejected. But, in the end, that's not entirely in their control. And so there's a risk factor if they had gone under a statute that could have carried a much more severe penalty. The judge would have done something a little less predictable, I think. Does that sound right? Reasonable to you, Alan? You're the actual former prosecutor here, as we always like to remind.
Oh, come on, man. It was like for 6 months and I was very bad at it. Sure. Whatever you said sounds reasonable. And this is a little different than like a drug and gun prosecution in Maryland, but fair enough. So before we close out, I do want to talk about the response to Assange and to this plea deal and to the end of this kind of chapter in America, in particular in American politics, and in particular on the left and the right. There's a wonderful tweet, which we will drop in the show notes, by Nicholas Grossman, who is, I'm looking this up, he is a professor of international relations at Illinois. And it says, "Hey Google, is there a recent real-world example of horseshoe theory in action?" And he is retweeting someone who has himself collected a bunch of tweets from a true murderer's row of the Green Party, Tucker Carlson, Cornel West, Marjorie Taylor Greene, RFK Jr., sort of all celebrating Assange. And look, I think the support that Assange had on, and again, I don't want to paint with a broad brush here, some corners of the left, right, very much some, was always like a little more understandable. I mean, he's in this, as Scott mentioned, this kind of long tradition of kind of viewing America as the great Satan, frankly, which has more been sort of a thing on the left. It's the embrace on the right that is just kind of wild, right? I mean, Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean, why?
Authority, man. Authority.
Well, because he helped the GRU help Trump in 2016. Like, that's the reason.
Do you think that's it, or is it just more of like a populist, anti-elite?
No, I do think this is just a broader anti-institutional sentiment right now, where everyone's speaking truth to power, whoever that power may be at any given point in time, is sort of something that's being championed by left and right. But seeing the evolution of this is just flabbergasting, right? To go back to Assange 1.0, as I was talking about earlier, right? This is in the wake of Bush. This is in the wake of WMD, of we need this transparency to hold the government accountable, to make sure that we're speaking truth to power. And that was very much, I think, why the left was more supportive initially. To see it now be picked up by the right really speaks to the transformation of the right itself, away from that sort of traditional understanding of a conservative, hawkish approach, where now we have just the full Trumpian takeover of this perspective.
I also think that, the left has moved away from him, right? I think that the sort of like techno utopian crowd has moved away from him as he increasingly aligned himself with Russia, not a techno
EFF has definitely not. I mean, there's a, pretty strong statement condemning.
Well, not right, but
I'm not saying
across the board, but I have seen a lot of people who were part of that community say this guy was a scumbag. Principles aside, but like this guy sucked, basically. And I think there is a lot less admiration for him on the leftist because of his alignment with Trump and with Russia in 2016, which makes it, all the more ironic that he appears to have decided to side with Trump on the grounds that would somehow, give him a literal get out of jail free card, only for the Trump administration to then indict him. But them's the breaks.
Well, it is even more complicated than that. for Trump in particular, who's actually responds to this now, I'm very curious to hear, because I don't think I've actually seen, when I was just looking online, I haven't seen like a specific statement by him, although I may just not have found it yet. Because, of course, it was under his administration, not only did they indict him, although you could say maybe that was something that was already in process or happened at staff level. Remember his CIA director, Mike Pompeo, there's a story that Assange has been repeating for years, had a plan to have him assassinated or kidnapped. I find that somewhat dubious, although it's from, Michael Isikoff and other fairly credible national security reporters, at least on other stories. So it's a weird story. I have my doubts about whether that happened quite the way as it's portrayed.
Yeah.
But that said, a lot of people in the Trump administration were very adamantly anti-Assange when they were in office. But much like TikTok, maybe we'll see a bit of a flip-flop on this from Trump now as a candidate, because he loves to run for these kind of anti-institutionalist causes. And that's very much
what
I think
Assange is now. He was saying that he was going to pardon Assange, as recently as a few months ago.
I remember that. Yeah, fair. Maybe that's consistent with that, but I don't know.
What are the over-unders on this being a question on Thursday night?
Ooh, good question.
It might actually. That might be. Stay tuned for next week, listeners.
Stay tuned.
Well, let us cast our gaze west from the U.S. District Court of the Northern Mariana Islands to Yemen, where the Houthis have been continuing their attacks on commercial shipping as well as U.S. military vessels. So there's been a bunch of reporting about this recently. Some reporting in the Post has some pretty striking statistics, including that since November, the Pentagon has recorded more than 190 attacks on both U.S. military vessels and commercial shipping off the coast of Yemen, including nearly 100 attacks since U.S. airstrikes began in January. And that by the end of March, the volume of traffic through the Suez Canal and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait had dropped by half, which is some pretty striking numbers. So, Scott, I have to ask, I feel like there was a lot of reporting about this initially, and then it kind of got quiet again, and now I've been seeing another surge of reporting. Has anything happened in the interim, or is it the sort of reporting of the type that is along the lines of, hey guys, it's still a problem?
So it's actually really interesting, and I don't think we 100% know what has happened. But essentially in February and March, we had that attack in Jordan that kicked off a real spike and crisis in the U.S.-Iranian relationship, which is kind of underlying this because, of course, the Houthis, as well as the various Iraqi militia groups, including groups involved in that Jordan attack, are all kind of Iranian-backed. And to some extent, Iranian proxies, so that probably overstates the degree of direct control Iran exercised over them at all given times. And that up until then, we'd seen this kind of rapid escalation related to the Gaza conflict on both in Iraq and Syria and in Yemen. That attack triggered a crisis, did trigger a military response. But since then, it looks like there had been a bit of a effort to cool things down a little bit on both sides, I would guess. We hadn't gotten word of any major pushes or attacks. Some low-level hostilities, medium-level hostilities, maybe a better way to describe it, was still happening by the Houthis and in Iraq by the Iraqi militia groups. That hasn't stopped. That's been ongoing the last few months, but not quite at the same scale or tempo, or at least the United States hasn't appeared to need to respond with the same scale or tempo, because they have kept most of their military responses since March below a threshold that doesn't require, in the executive branch's view, war powers reporting. And that's interesting because it tells us a little bit about the type of strikes they're doing. The main legal justification that the Biden administration is pursuing in the Red Sea as to when it has to report things to Congress, when its actions may be restricted by the War Powers Resolution, is that they say if we're acting in self-defense or in response to an imminent threat, CENTCOM itself can act as a unit level in defense there, and that doesn't trigger War Powers Resolution reporting requirements. This is all very dubious. People would argue whether this is the right way to read the War Powers Resolution, but it's become increasingly clear this is how the Biden administration is reading it. So as long as the military action CENTCOM is taking in coordination with multilateral allies, who of course have their own legal regimes, falls below that threshold, they don't feel the need to sort of report it. A handful of times, the Biden administration has authorized much more proactive, broader military strikes in Yemen. But the last time it did it was in March, prior to this sort of, cooling down period, if that is what happened. Instead, since then, what we saw up until about 3 weeks ago, actually up until the beginning of June, I should say, so a little longer than that, we primarily saw CENTCOM forces targeting unarmed and unmanned naval surface vehicles, rockets, shooting down various sorts of arms, but not spending as much time directly targeting targets in Yemen proper. And where they did, they always said this is related to imminent self-defense. We think this is directly threatening our ships, U.S. commercial ships, or allied ships and allied commercial ships in the region. Starting in May, we started seeing this get pushed a little further. Still described as self-defense actions, but more and more attacks actually against radar sites and other sites within Yemen. So the question then becomes like, well, does the United States feel like it can keep ratcheting up what it can do in self-defense to start hitting these targets? Like, is that enough to provide whatever sort of deterrent effect it wants? It doesn't seem like it is, because it's obviously not working right now. Or to actually defend these troops? Or is it going to have to do more proactive military action? And if they do, then that's something that, at least in line with their prior practice, would be authorized by the president. And they have to make an argument that every time we do it, we're doing this as a one-off. We're not making this part of a campaign. And that's why the 60 to 90-day war powers resolution clock doesn't run over. But long story short, it just means that there is this sort of framework, whereas at least they've been operating and they've been able to justify their conduct, but it has to be of a certain scale before you get presidential involvement. And then when you get presidential involvement, it opens up another kind of legal can of worms. And the question now is, in those constraints, can you still do what you need to do? Or is there a case for stronger military action, stronger diplomatic action, or some other strategy to crack this nut that is persistent and is now having consequences, where we're seeing ships be sunk and people be killed by Houthi attacks, something that wasn't happening at as significant a scale earlier in the Houthi campaign?
I do want to point out from the New York Times reporting on this, which I think is fascinating, the increased use of Houthi sea drones facilitating more attacks. So, not to be the broken record who always brings up undersea cables, but previously these have been brought up in the context of using sea drones to disrupt and even break undersea cables. And now we're seeing, as the New York Times refers to them, waterborne boats loaded with explosives commanded by remote control. So it's hard to imagine. Right? Like, I'm just seeing like a speedboat, right? When you go to a pond in a random idyllic park and you see those little boats cruising around, those are difficult to stop. And if you can imagine all of those causing disruption in this primary area, this primary shipping corridor, I think it's going to be a long time before we get back to normal in the with respect to shipping and supply chain issues.
So, I mean, I'm curious, Scott, what, in your view, or in the sort of the view of the military analysts, would it take to stop these attacks? I mean, Kevin did point out that you have all these drones, and obviously it's harder to do so when you have this decentralized kind of low-level capability that's quite cheap. It's funny. I'll plug a book by Ben Wittes, Lawfare editor-in-chief and Rational Security host emeritus, The Future of Violence from 2015, which was this, at the time, kind of sci-fi, slightly out there book about how the democratization of violence through things like drones is going to sort of fundamentally change, world politics. It does seem like, whether it's the role of drones in Ukraine or the role of drones here, or the role of paragliders, right, and drones in Gaza in the Hamas attack, you're seeing both the increased ability of these actors to inflict sort of disproportionate damage with their traditional capabilities, and also the difficulties in large established powers like the U.S. fighting back. I mean, is there nothing short of a ground invasion and occupation of Yemen, which obviously the United States will not do, and it should not do, that will stop this? I mean, cutting the Suez Canal shipping traffic in half is an extremely big deal.
It is, and it's something I think the international community is pretty alarmed about, and would be raising even more louder objections if, frankly, it weren't tied to the war in Gaza. That is increasingly controversial for a lot of the international community. And that's the pretext, if not the actual motivation for these sorts of attacks. I guess is it somewhere a little bit between the two. But generally, of course, they're just attacking random third parties. None of these ships, or very few of them, have much ties to the United States or Israel or anybody else involved in the conflict. And so it is, at least in substantial part, a little pretextual, a little arbitrary about how they're acting out in response to that sort of incident. In terms of militarily, what it would take, I don't think we 100% know, but at a minimum, it would require a huge commitment of additional naval forces to deter these groups, probably a lot more proactive targeting of groups, because right now, again, if you are actually faithfully acting on a kind of imminent self-defense sort of framework, you're limited to how close the causal link can be between what you can target and actual attacks happening. I think strategically it's a lot easier to go up the supply chain. To do that, you have to be much more active and proactive in what you're targeting, and you're not going to be able to make that sort of case. And it's probably the type of thing that CENTCOM is going to be less comfortable doing on its own without a presidential directive or authorization, and that the White House might be a little hesitant to take on for both political and legal reasons that are closely intertwined in this space. So it's just really hard to know what's required militarily. And then the other question that people keep coming back on, often in fairly like snide terms online, is where they say military never works. In this case, we're turning to military because it's a hammer. We have a hammer and it's nails. Really what you need is a diplomatic solution here. And I generally sympathize with that argument in a lot of different contexts. Here's one where I'm not sure what that looks like exactly, though, because the Houthis are pretty isolated. I think diplomatic engagement is important with Iran. That's why we got what appeared to have been a bit of a cooling off period from March through May or June this year. And so that can have limited gains there. But, short of ending the war in Gaza, what the Biden administration actually is proactively trying to do right now, but presents a lot of its own challenges. It's not clear what is going to end this sort of round of conflict. And I'm not sure why you would believe the Houthis would stop there. They have lots of reservations with the international community, as does Iran. And so if this pretext goes away at the Gaza conflict, I'm not sure why they won't just find another one. So I think actually a military solution, diplomatic solution kind of go hand in hand in here. You have to kind of enforce some of the rules of the road, even if you try and find some sort of accommodation to make it happen less. But it's really hard to do in this particular regional relationship, and where Iran is very savvy and capable of providing a supply line to proxy forces around the region here in a way that to stop that would, again, require much, much higher level of policing and enforcement in maritime zones, frankly, to figure out some sort of deal with Oman to end overland routes in the case of Yemen. I mean, it just presents all sorts of diplomatic and practical difficulty to be very, very high cost. Iran's the big actor in the neighborhood. It knows the neighborhood. It can do a lot. And getting it to stop that from a distance it's really tricky and costly. So I don't think there is an easy solution here, as much as I think a lot of people sometimes pretend like what we're doing now is so wrong. There must be some easier alternative.
So not to drag this into the muck of domestic politics, but we are 4.5 months away from an election. And so I think it is useful to think about that. I am not I'm neither a foreign policy analyst nor a political analyst. So I'm not sure how any one of the suite of options that Biden has in front of him plays into the election. But I will sort of offer a deeply anecdotal data point. I prefer to think of it as artisanal data rather than anecdote. So I'm in the market for a new car, and I'm driving around, and I want a hybrid car because I'm like, I don't know, I'm a yuppie or something. And I found this really nice car that I wanted, but the dealer didn't it really had very, very low inventory. And he had low inventory, and like everyone in the Minnesota area had low inventory. And he said, yeah, and it's because the slowdown in the Suez Canal. All the ships that take the cars and stuff like that are slow. Now, I have no idea if that's like actually the reason, though it seems plausible. But what I found interesting about that is it takes a huge amount for foreign policy to intervene in the consciousness of Americans. And if this Houthi situation and the slowdown in the Suez Canal does begin to create a narrative, not just a sort of like general world is out of control, which Americans generally don't care about because like we're blessed with a giant continental sized country with 2 big oceans on either side of us and friendly neighbors, but of things that cause increased inflation, even if the inflation is going to be felt right now. But it's Biden, he can't control the Houthis and they've shut down the Suez Canal and there's inflation. I think, again, ordinarily I would discount this because foreign policy almost never matters in American elections, but I just do wonder, and I wonder if Biden's advisors, right, whether Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, or the folks running his campaign, are thinking about that this is coming at an extremely awkward time, and that on the margin that leads the administration to put more pressure, whether it's diplomatic or, I agree with Scott, probably military, on the Houthis, if only to reopen the Suez Canal.
Well, let us shift our focus now from the Middle East to the nearby continent of Europe, which will not be enjoying the rollout of a new Apple product suite in the fall related to artificial intelligence, at least not yet. Apple has announced that it is releasing its own Apple Intelligence, unfortunately not named IAI, as I hoped it would be, which is going to be integrated.
The most obnoxious Apple thing ever.
I love it. I don't know if just slapping Apple on things is better and just like bland nouns, and then I have to number it into oblivion. But that's fine. Either they're all pretty.
Like with Apple's shtick, and this has been since the Steve Jobs era. And like, look, I use a bunch of Apple products. It's an amazing company, but like they have this idea that before Apple did something, the thing literally didn't exist, and that like stuff Apple does like comes out of the mind of Tim Cook, and it's just so annoying.
You didn't know Gore invented the internet and Apple invented everything else. I mean, that's
honestly what it's
including
like.
Al Gore. That's exactly right.
Right.
The specific product that we're talking about is going to be, from what I can tell from the information Apple's released, like basically integration into text functions, search functions, Siri, all sorts of stuff onto various Apple products of pretty functional artificial intelligence. Hopefully we'll see when it comes out, of the type we're becoming increasingly familiar with ChatGPT, which is useful for various applications. I don't know if it's quite earth-shattering yet, but I
WikiPleaks, Scott.
WikiPleaks, I know. It still burns me to be replaced and rendered insufficient so early. But certainly there's going to be greater applications for this, whether from APIs, from other groups integrating. Presumably that's the way a lot of these AI companies are. They have kind of a consumer-facing basic interface, but then the real usages are at the API side or other applications of it through other third-party applications and bigger corporate or industrial uses, things like that lean on the same platform. So presumably that's like where the real social benefit is, other than kind of basic consumer services. But Europe's not going to get any of this because Apple has said, we're going to roll this product out in the United States, and we're not planning to do it in Europe, at least initially. And they've blamed that on regulatory uncertainty arising from the fact that Europe has certainly AI regulations in place that the United States and other jurisdictions don't, and then also has been fairly proactive in regulating the sort of tech space. So, Kevin, I'm kind of curious for your reactions on this. What should we be taking away from this in terms of how both AI regulation fits into the space and how it intersects with the industry at this still pretty early stage? Because we seem to be seeing a implicit, if not quite explicit, play by Apple leveraging its, frankly, market ability to produce a product that has demand that Europeans presumably want, and trying to leverage that to give a little bit of a stick against Europe, saying, your regulatory approaches present some problems with us. And this is coming at a moment where they actually are facing regulatory enforcement action from European authorities on a separate front, more on kind of more of an antitrust kind of consumer rights front, regards to marketing cellular devices, not directly related to this, but related in terms of Europe's general regulatory approach. How much of a feature of the landscape is this sort of conflict going to be? And how does the United States fit into it as the country is still figuring out how it's going to approach regulating AI on most meaningful fronts?
So I'll need about 4.5 hours to answer that question completely. So I hope you've got the rest of the afternoon booked off. I think one thing I want
90
to
seconds,
drill down
buddy.
on. No, 90 seconds. Here we go. One thing I want to drill down on is that AI governance folks generally talk about 3 ways to govern AI: data, compute, and algorithms. And here, the interesting part of why Apple is withholding deployment into Europe is actually the data prong, which I think is kind of understudied. So they're concerned that the GDPR and the Digital Markets Act, the DMA, are actually the basis for withholding integration into the EU. So it's the data component that they're concerned most about, not necessarily the EU AI Act. And so I think when we talk about AI governance, it's really important to think about all 3 aspects of potential means to govern AI. And here, it's kind of that sleepy, forgotten GDPR that's coming up and actually impacting Apple. So that's one thing I want to point out. The second is that, as I discussed with Alan, Dean Ball, and David Rubenstein in a podcast that's forthcoming, so get ready, listeners, this is really showing the tension between innovation and access to innovation, however you want to define that, and regulation. So here, is it really going to deprive Europeans to have to wait to get access to this latest Siri Or is this just another instance of everyone in Europe being okay because they have to wait a little bit longer to get access to threads? The last time we saw a company kind of withhold going straight into Europe. For me, that probably seems worthwhile. I'm not sure that everyone's going to be missing out on this new and improved Siri, but it does raise
the whole
question.
iPhone glows now. Come on, Kevin.
It glows. This is the promise of AI, right? Oh my gosh, look at all the good it can do. So for me, I think this is a pro with respect to the regulatory standpoint. If we're seeing these companies have to think and pause about when they're going to release their products and be more responsible about the data they're going to use to inform these products, to me, that's a trade-off that's worthwhile. And obviously, we've seen Europeans are a little bit more protective of their data in comparison to Americans. But I don't think that this is going to be the thing that distinguishes AI in the US versus AI in the EU. To me, this is small potatoes in the scheme of things.
I will just jump in and say, this reminds me of there was a period on Twitter where people were frustrated with its poor moderation. I think this was well before
the entire history of Twitter.
Yeah, exactly. And someone figured out that if you were in the US but you set your location as in Germany, you could benefit from the laws in Germany that prohibit Nazi speech and thereby just boot all the Nazis off your Twitter feed. Learning that Europe is not going to allow Apple to roll out this AI feature did make me wonder if there's some way I can set my iPhone's location as within Europe. Because at this point, frankly, I would pay not to have AI stuff on my phone.
I'm sorry, you don't want Microsoft and Apple to be looking at every piece of data on your device in real time?
No, nor do I want the little pop-up thing saying like, hey, would you like an AI integration? No, I would not.
Such a Luddite.
I may need to get fact-checked on this, but I do think this is one of the rare instances where Apple is letting you opt in to these new AI features.
Oh, thank
which
God.
I think may set a really important precedent with the adoption and integration of these AI tools. And hopefully that does become a norm because, as Scott pointed out, these AI agents, agentic AI, this is the way of the future. We're going to see more and more AI agents in every context doing everything from setting your schedule to booking your hair appointment to buying your car, Alan. Don't worry, you'll never have to go through this again.
To building your own your own personal nuclear and biological weapons.
Hey, save that for another podcast, sir. We can go on
Not
and on
in the
about
state
that.
of California, if people listen to that from last week.
So yeah, I mean, look, I agree with Kevin's bottom line that like this particular delay, like who cares? But I do think it's a useful frame for thinking about EU in general, just sort of different regulatory regimes. I will admit, I have a sort of more complicated set of thoughts on EU AI regulation than my sometimes snide remarks may make it sound. I think one thing I should admire about the EU is that its willingness to stand up to the large tech companies, its willingness to be aggressive in competition law. You know, the EU is the reason we have to thank for all Apple products using USB-C and not the Lightning cable, which is actually pretty nice. EU is the reason we have to thank that the Apple App Store is in very tentative ways beginning to open up to third-party apps, more in Europe than in the United States, which is kind of obnoxious. And I say that again to give Europe credit where credit's due, and also to say I think maybe some of this is Apple also just poking the finger a little bit at the EU with whom it has a very large beef. And also, I think that, look, I think it's my going back to sort of previous discussion, my objection to like the California stuff was never that different jurisdictions shouldn't have different AI use rules. I think that's great. And if the EU just has different values, maybe they're more precautionary, maybe they care more about data privacy. I think it's like totally fine for them to do. The question is it good for them in the long run? I mean, who knows, right? One possibility is that they're just going to get all this stuff 6 months or a year later, and maybe that's a good thing, right? They're not going to be early adopters. Maybe you don't want to be an early adopter for AI. The other possibility is that this is going to be a long-term drag on this kind of stuff, not the Siri delay itself, but this kind of attitude is going to be a long-term drag on the EU economy. One thing that's notable, I think, is that Apple AI is about as privacy protective, I think, as this kind of AI integration can get. A massive amount of it's done on the device. There's all sorts of privacy and security features. It's always been Apple's calling card. Even when the iPhone has to call out to the cloud for more complicated queries, there's like all this unbelievable engineering that's done. So if this isn't good enough for the EU, nothing is going to be good enough for the EU, to be clear, right? Again, that's a choice they can make, but like that's not a trivial choice. The EU has always, and this is kind of the snide version of their critique, and there's something I think to this, which is, the EU likes to regulate because it doesn't build. It doesn't have a giant technology sector. And so it doesn't care about regulating so much. Now, interestingly, that's not quite true with AI. They're actually better with AI than you would think. I mean, Mistral, this French AI company, is actually a pretty world-leading AI lab. But compared to the US, compared to China, obviously, the EU is pretty far behind. And the last thing I would say is, the EU is just not doing well economically, right? Their productivity is very low. They are actually substantially poorer than the United States. A fact that was not true 30 years ago. Now, they're not poor. They're doing just fine. And again, they can make their choices. But the EU is not doing economically great, and this is causing political problems for them. I think a lot of what we see in terms of the far right systems in Europe are connected in some admittedly complicated way to this sort of stagnation in the EU. And again, I don't want to say that like the fact that this glowing Siri orb or something isn't going to come to the EU in the next 6 months is directly connected to that. But if you think that AI is going to be, along with biotechnology, another bioengineering, another thing that the EU often has a kind of a strangely on and off again relationship with, are going to be some of the main technological drivers of economic growth in the next several decades. I do worry for the EU's sake about just what a heavy regulatory apparatus they have. Now, again, like their response might be, well, like it's not your job to worry about us. You're go be an American, right? We're going to be Europeans. Like that's totally fine. But I don't know. It's worth thinking about. And if we have any EU listeners, actually, if there's a discourse in the EU about this, I'd be very curious to hear what sort of folks in the EU think about the fact that they're not getting the latest and greatest AI thing. Are they happy about it? Are they sad about it? Something in between.
Phone into the AI hotline now. We'll take callers from the EU. I do think that this is an understudied notion, though, culturally, about the French approach in particular to AI. There's a very real sentiment among Macron and Mistral about upending what they perceive as American dominance in the tech sphere. And so the next AI summit is actually in France. In 2025, and they're going to be using that to try to say, "Hey,
you and
this
me,
is
Kevin,
Europe's...
are we going to Paris?
Oh, Paris, baby, let's go!
Paris,
the
baby.
The boys are heading to get croissants. Let's do it." I think this is a narrative we need to spend more attention on. So please do call the AI hotline if you're so inclined.
Well, folks, that is unfortunately all the time we have for this week to dig into this topic. But this would not be Rational Security if we did not leave you with some object lessons to ponder over in the week to come. Alan, what do you have for us this week?
So I'm pulling a Jurassic and doing some more journalism for my object lesson. It is a really great article that came out this week in Reason magazine. It's by Liz Wolfe. It's called "How the Libertarian Party Lost Its Way. 2 years post-takeover, some longtime activists and donors claim the Mises caucus has driven the party into the ground." So the Libertarian Party is one of the well-established third parties. I mean, it's the third party. They never get much votes. But they're like a real party, and they have like a real platform. Libertarianism is an actual thing. And over the last 10 years or so, they've gone completely insane. There's just no other way of describing it than the batshitification of the Libertarian Party. They are now this extraordinary far-right, racist, trollish. I mean, it is wild what happened to the Libertarian Party. And it's a shame because I'm not a libertarian, though like all obnoxious 16-year-olds, I was a libertarian for 4 weeks after reading the first 20 pages of Anarchy, State, and Utopia. But like it is an actually first 20 pages. I'm not like, let's be clear. Where my Nozick stands at.
That's a hell of an introduction.
Nozick,
that guy.
okay.
He does. Dude can write.
He's a much better writer than Rawls.
He is a much better writer than Rawls. What I will say is although I'm not a libertarian, it is a real political philosophy. It is an important perspective. It is coherent. It is principled, and there's a lot of really good thinking about it. Out of it, I think Reason magazine is a good example of this. And just to see the Libertarian Party become like this true cesspool that it is sad. But it's just a wild, wild story. You know, if you think that what happens in a large established party like the GOP can be crazy, if you take all those dynamics and you make it much smaller, much more hothouse, the people are just much weirder. It's wild, and so it's a really good piece of reporting. It's sad, it's funny, it's interesting. Highly recommended. Let's pour one out for the Libertarian Party. They've really departed the scene.
Quinta, what do you have for this week?
I am branching out into music.
Whoa.
Yeah, that's right.
My turf. Back off. With
Yes. So I, back in the day, was a big nerd. I'm sure you'll all be shocked to hear this. And so, like other big nerds who enjoyed indie music, I was a big fan of the Decemberists, who I now have to say, looking back, I think are one of the few bands from the like indie hipster mustache ship tattoo era of the like mid-aughts who actually come out looking pretty good. And they have a new album out. The title does not roll off the tongue. It is titled As It Ever Was, So It Will Be Again. And I have to say, I'm kind of loving it so far. It is pretty great. I saw them live in the tour that they had before the album release, which is a structure I'm not used to, but they closed with the last song on this album, which is called Joan in the Garden and is 20 minutes long and includes this like weird 6-minute sort of like prog rock Pink Floyd, like we're just making sort of like woo noises in the middle because artistic integrity is very important. And I will say, playing that song as the encore is a real power move because you get to see who walks out.
You will not leave this concert.
Exactly. I stuck it out. I stayed. And it was extremely enjoyable. And I highly recommend the album.
If you had any doubts that Quinta is a millennial, she just resolved it right there. Although I will agree, it is an excellent album. I've also seen them live, not in like 20 years now, but I've seen them 4 or 5 times live, I think. And they're excellent.
They do a very good show.
They do an amazing live show. One of the best live bands I've ever seen. So worth checking out. Excellent. Well, for my object lesson, I will steal and encroach on Alan's usual turf and talk about a movie I saw with my wife this weekend while we were watching our children on television. And that is a charming, if slightly weird comedy ? It is some funny moments. I'm not sure if it's truly a comedy, but it's a movie called The Lost King, which is a BBC film production that is a dramatization of the story of the amateur historian Philippa Langley, who discovered ultimately the lost resting place of King Richard III that had been lost for centuries and has been on a kind of multi-year campaign to kind of redeem him from the caricature that Shakespeare put forward of him as this hunchbacked villain and make the case that actually he was a more legit king and had been the victim of centuries of Tudor propaganda, as she says in the movie. It's a charming movie. It's got Sally Hawkins, who plays Philippa Langley, who I enjoy in a good role. Steve Coogan helped co-author the screenplay and is in it as well as her husband or ex-husband, I guess. It's a charming watch. I don't know if it's like the most exciting movie I've ever seen. My wife had some issues with it. But I quite enjoyed it. It's worth checking out. The one thing I will say, and this is what my wife took issue with, is that it really drives home the idea that she was driven by mystical forces and her own insanity, because the whole movie is about her hallucinating and seeing Richard III slowly guide her towards his resting place. I don't know if this actually reflects how she perceived she found his body, which she did in fact do, as far as I can tell from the historical record, but it's really interesting in that regard. And that's my wife's beef, as she said, essentially, it was a weird moment to love movies where it's all about somebody with crazy worldviews that are completely contrary to science, ignoring the experts, following their guts, and winning the day. And that's a fair point. That's a very fair critique of this movie. But in spite of that, it was fairly charming. And I think I enjoyed it. So worth checking out. Kevin, bring us home. What do you have for us this week?
You know, I'm going to jump on the music train and I'm going to go far more into the land of Gen Z. So I will, even though my inner Oregonian roots, I'm from Portland originally, when you all said Decemberists, my heart started beating a lot faster. A lot of joy from the indie scene there.
Wonderful.
I'm going to go the opposite way, though, and just embrace pop. So Kygo released a new album, and it's got a lot of great music on it. It will be featured at whatever dance party you go to next, especially if you join me here in Miami at some club. But the coolest part about this new Kygo album is he did a live performance of it at Troll's Tongue. Now, if you're wondering what the heck is Troll's Tongue, you are not alone. I am there as well. A cliff that just juts out over this expansive lake in Norway. And Kygo had a piano flown to the furthest point on this rock jutting out from the cliff, and he just pounds away on this awesome album. You can watch it on YouTube. You're going to have a great time. Or you can just listen to it when you write law review articles like I do. Really keeps things interesting when you're going through your 400th Blue Book citation. So highly recommend it to get through those dull moments.
I'm looking this up now. That looks absolutely terrifying, and I'm not even sure I would stand on that. Let's play piano on it.
No kidding.
The coolest part is he invites some of the artists to come sing during this live performance, and they're dancing on that crazy troll's tongue. So yeah, maybe if you're scared of heights, definitely don't watch. Consider this your content warning. But if you embrace craziness, then check out this video.
Excellent. Well, with that suggestion, that brings us to the end of this week's episode. Rational Security is, of course, a production of Lawfare, so be sure to visit us at lawfaremedia.org for our show page with links to past episodes, for our written work and the written work of other Lawfare contributors, and for information on Lawfare's other phenomenal podcast series. Also, be sure to follow us on Twitter at RATL Security, and be sure to leave a rating or review wherever you might be listening. In addition, sign up to become a material supporter of Lawfare on Patreon for an ad-free version of this podcast and other special benefits. For more information, visit lawfaremedia.org/support. Our audio engineer and producer this week was Ian Enright of Goat Rodeo, and our music, as always, was performed by Sophia Yan. We are once again edited by the wonderful Jen Patcha. On behalf of my co-hosts, Alan and Quinta, and our special guest, Kevin Frazier, I am Scott R. Anderson, and we will talk to you next week. Till then, goodbye.